Jason was a 27-year-old man who worked at a sanatorium in Canada. He held a custodian position, which allowed him to pay for his college tuition as he dreamed of becoming a therapist someday. His job was straightforward. He cleaned the elderly care area. However, often some higher-ranking employees would divert his duties, making him administer medication to the elderly and even care for them. Jason didn't mind this. He liked having more contact with the patients, as he enjoyed understanding what had led each of them to end up in that place. The job was simple, and almost every day was calm and without much confusion until one day. He noticed a patient who was causing a lot of trouble for the staff. She was 60 years old but appeared much younger, and something in her demeanor made her stand out from the other patients. However, the woman didn't speak. She only mumbled some incomprehensible things. Jason noticed that this lady was always away from the other patients, her gaze almost always vacant and sad. He also noticed that she was very polite. When Jason gave her the pills, she nodded her head as a gesture of thanks. When he cleaned her room, she would step out and wait at the door until he finished and again nodded her head in gratitude. It might seem like something simple, but in that place this was rare. One day it was raining and very cold. She was knocking on the door as if asking for help. Jason went to her room and tried to understand the gestures she was making, asking him for something. Jason realized what it was and brought her another blanket, as it was winter, and she was very cold. The lady nodded her head in thanks again, but then went to the foggy window and wrote with her fingers. "Help me, I want to write." In the sanatorium, pens, pencils, or cell phones were prohibited for the safety of the patients. Jason wanted to help the lady but didn't know how. Despite being afraid of losing his job, Jason was curious to know what she had to say. The next day, he went to her room and gave her a notepad with a pen. The lady smiled, and the first word she wrote was, "Thank you." Then she wrote that she wanted his help to get out of there. But before that, she would tell him everything that happened to convince him to help her. The lady then told her story. Claire Hamilton, a 60-year-old lady, lived in Canada. She lived in a mansion with her 2 children, Daniel, 25, and Anna, 22. Despite her age, she didn't plan to retire anytime soon because she loved what she did and wanted to leave everything in order for her children so they would never be in need. However, her work was taking a lot of her time and even her health. Because of this, she started feeling frequent dizziness but never went to the doctor. After a tiring day at work, taking care of her businesses, Claire returned home and found Anna parading around the living room with a new outfit and looking at herself in the mirror. Her mother noticed they were luxury clothes and couldn't imagine how much they had cost. But Claire was shocked when she looked at the living room sofa. It was full of shopping bags, so many that she couldn't imagine why her daughter had bought so many clothes. "Anna, why did you buy so many clothes? There are more clothes here than will fit in your closet," said Claire. "I needed to buy new clothes, Mom, and renew my wardrobe. I got rid of all the old clothes I had and threw them in the trash," Anna replied. Claire immediately went outside the house and looked at the trash bin. It was full of clothes, so many that some were on the ground because they didn't fit in the large trash can the house had. This made Claire very irritated. She couldn't understand why her daughter needed to throw so many new clothes in the trash. But the worst for Claire was that her daughter didn't even think about donating her clothes. Her mother started an argument with her, trying to knock some sense into her, but it was to no avail. When Claire asked when she would start college or help her with the business, Anna gave her an irritated look and, without saying anything, went to her room. Claire sat on the sofa, unable to bear the headache she was feeling, and before she could even rest, she received a call. It was her son Daniel. He said he was at the police station and would be arrested if she didn't help. Claire felt a chill down her spine and rushed to see her son. At the station, she found Daniel handcuffed, and it was clear he had drunk a lot. The police said he drove in that state and hit a cyclist. Luckily for him, the cyclist only suffered minor scratches. Claire was so disappointed with her son that she didn't even speak to him. However, she resolved the entire situation, paid his bail, and compensated the cyclist with a good sum of money for what her son had done to him. Claire cried as she drove her car while Daniel slept in the back seat. At home, she didn't bother waking him up and left him in the car. Claire went to her room, and with a tremendous headache, she thought about what she had done wrong with her children. The next day, she made a decision and gathered them both. Both Daniel and Anna would have to leave the house and wouldn't have the credit card she gave them anymore. Anna would have to start working in her mother's company and begin her college studies. Daniel already worked at the company but would have to bear all the costs Claire paid to the cyclist and for the car damages, which would no longer be his. The two were irritated and opposed their mother's decision, saying she couldn't do that to them. However, Claire didn't want to argue. She gave them 2 weeks to leave the house and find another place to live. They immediately went to the bank and tried to withdraw as much money as they could, but it was too late. Their cards were already cancelled. Claire was sad to have to reach this point and cried for several hours, but she knew it was necessary for her children to become better and more responsible people. The next day, while returning from work, Claire started feeling even stronger pains in her head. When she got home, she sat on the sofa, unable to bear it, and when she picked up the phone to call one of her children, she fainted. When she woke up, she didn't know how much time had passed, but it was still day. However, when she looked at her phone screen, she noticed it was the next day. She had spent 24 hours on that sofa, and neither of her children had done anything. Unfortunately, she felt strange. She couldn't move normally, and her mouth felt strange. She could barely speak. With difficulty, she sent a text message to her 2 children, who took a long time to respond. They eventually took her to the hospital. The doctor told her that all the stress had caused damage to her brain. Claire couldn't move one leg normally, but more importantly, her speech was affected. However, with time, she could return to how she was before. Claire cried for several hours. She could still walk despite her leg, but what worried her most was her speech. She couldn't speak any word completely and feared it might be permanent. Due to her condition, her children stayed home for a while longer and took over her business. Fortunately, after a few months, Claire's leg regained normal movement, but her speech hadn't returned. Daniel and Anna called their mother to a meeting and said she needed to get out of the house and not worry about anything. She had dedicated so much time to work and to them that it was only fair for her to rest somewhere for a while. This idea delighted Claire. For the first time, she saw her children concerned about her. Emotional, she accepted to travel and let them plan the whole trip. It was a 2-week trip, including visits to tourist spots. Claire was excited and thanked her children for the gift. On the plane, she even felt better and grateful that her children were changing as people. When she got off the plane, Claire picked up her luggage, and a car was already waiting to take her to the hotel. She looked out the window and thought the place was very far from the city, in a deserted area, but she finally arrived at the hotel. However, the facade of the building didn't say hotel, but sanatorium. Claire wondered what kind of bad joke this was and gestured to the driver to take her to the hotel. However, 3 men working at the place came and held her. When asked if she was the new patient, the driver said yes. She was forcibly taken inside, and since then, she hasn't been able to leave. After Jason read her story, he didn't know what to do. Claire could be lying to him just to escape from there. Then she wrote a phone number and said for him to talk to this man, and everything would be clear to Jason. He took the number and left her room. Before leaving work, Jason passed by Claire and told her he would call that number. If everything were true, he would do everything to get her out of there. With tears in her eyes, Claire smiled. The next day, Jason called the number and told everything to the man on the other end of the line. When he returned to work the following day, he found the place full of police, and Claire was with a man in a black suit. She went towards him and hugged him. The man in the suit also went to him and shook his hand. He was a long-time friend of Claire and also her personal lawyer. Everything Claire had told Jason was true. The lawyer had also discovered that it was all planned by Claire's children. They had paid the sanatorium's director to keep Claire confined there and told everyone she had retired and was traveling indefinitely. However, the mother's love was still strong in her, so she didn't report her children and asked her lawyer not to tell the police they had done it. Claire was happy to be free, but sadness was still visible in her eyes. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye. Daniel and Anna were packing their things and leaving the mansion they had lived in almost all their lives with their mother. They were bankrupt. After sending their mother to the sanatorium, they had taken over her businesses, but neither was good at managing them and found the work tedious. After 4 years, they finally declared bankruptcy and had lost everything. The house, car, and bank accounts were all gone. But strangely, they weren't sad. The day before, they received a visit from a lawyer who was a longtime friend of Claire. He gave them the sad news that their mother had passed away but said they probably wouldn't be entitled to any of her other assets. Anna and Daniel couldn't understand how they, as her children, wouldn't be entitled to her inheritance. The lawyer then told them something that left them shocked. They weren't her biological children, and their birth records were falsified. To help them understand, the lawyer told them more about Claire. She was born in Canada but was the daughter of immigrants, making her life very difficult. Her parents worked hard to give her better opportunities, but it was tough due to their financial situation. Years later, her father passed away, making life even harder for her and her mother. Fortunately, her mother met a young man years later, and they fell in love. He had better living conditions, allowing Claire to study in good schools and have a better life. Years passed, and her mother and stepfather had passed away, but they provided many opportunities for Claire to succeed, and she took advantage of them all. She built a true empire and was one of the most influential and wealthy women in her city. However, all that money wasn't enough to make Claire feel complete. She desired to have a child but never found a man she thought worthy of being their father. Unfortunately, she discovered she had a severe uterine disease and had to have it removed, meaning she could never have children. This devastated Claire, but close friends told her it wasn't the end of her dream of motherhood. She could adopt. For months, she visited orphanages, wanting to adopt a child. One day, a friend asked for her help. She knew a couple who had tried to cross the Canadian border with 2 children, but unfortunately, the couple didn't make it. The children escaped but were hiding from the authorities. Her friend said if the children were found by the authorities, they would likely be sent back to their country of origin, where they had no family and would suffer in a poor country's orphanage. This moved Claire, who decided to help. She and the lawyer wanted to do everything legally but realized it wouldn't be possible. So they created false birth certificates, and Claire adopted the children. They were Daniel and Anna. The two were shocked, but what shook them more was learning the amount of money and assets Claire still had in her name. It was a millionaire amount. Seeing their sadness, the lawyer said she left something for them in the will, but they would have to go to where Claire was buried to start the process. Immediately, their expressions changed. They were even smiling, not shocked by the news of being adopted or that their mother was no longer alive to guide them. They quickly packed and went to another city. Daniel and Anna were euphoric during the flight, making plans on how to spend the money. She wanted to buy a huge house and have a room just for clothes. Her dream was to wear a new outfit every day for an entire year. Daniel wanted to party, enjoy with friends, and never work again. The lawyer first took them to see Claire's grave. At the site, they met a young man named Jason. He introduced himself as a friend of Claire and said he was with her in her final moments. The lawyer then took out the will and read Claire's wishes. 98% of all my fortune should be donated to charitable institutions I've supported all my life. The remaining 2% is left to my 2 adoptive children, Daniel and Anna, but with the condition that they return to their country of origin. This amount will not be given as a lump sum. They will receive the equivalent of a minimum wage from their country until the money runs out. If they do not wish to move, the amount will be fully donated to a charitable institution. The siblings were outraged. They didn't know what to do. Neither had qualifications to work where they were, and without money, they would suffer greatly. But if they moved, they would go to a different, poorer country but would earn something, even if little. Anna couldn't stop crying, and Daniel was red with anger. They had no choice but to accept their mother's wish. After signing the documents, they would leave Canada and have to fight to live outside it. They left the site, and Jason and the lawyer were alone. Shortly after, Claire approached them. She was alive. Her gaze was unhappy. Even after everything her children did to her, The mother's love was still strong in her heart. After leaving the sanatorium, Claire didn't want to return to her city and wanted to forget everything. She became friends with Jason and his wife and was the godmother of their newborn son. For 4 years, she lived peacefully in that place and didn't miss her home or work. The retired life was better than she expected. But when she learned her companies had gone bankrupt and her children had nothing, she wanted to help them, but not in the way they would have liked. She planned everything with her lawyer and Jason. Claire did donate part of her fortune, but it was only 50%. As for her children, she would send the agreed amount each month. She knew they would suffer, but it was necessary. Claire left the cemetery, thoughtful, praying that one day her children would change and she could see them again, this time as good and responsible people.